what we're looking for are relationships with life, and relationships with money is one relationship with life. We're like, I wonder how many relationships with money there are. So we ended up with 7 relationships with money. And the way we trade our money is also indicative of the pattern we use to trade our time and our energy and even our words. Sometimes what you need from me is a mirror of who you are, where you are, so we can turn from that understanding of self and look out at the person that you want to become.
Tom, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters podcast. You were introduced to me by a mutual contact of ours, Ruta, who is a coach and I believe provides some coaching services to you. So let's start really with, what do you do today and how did you get to what you're doing today?
So today, the easy thing for me to say is I'm a financial advisor. I help people manage their money, make decisions about life. And, but in my experience with clients talking about what I do, I'm more like a coach or a mentor or some cases a therapist. Because so much of what money is to people is a way to trade their time and energy to get this medium that allows them to buy the kind of life that they want to have for themselves and for the people they love. And that's something that we encourage and support. And, I've been doing it now for 30 years. So we think we're pretty good at it, but we're always willing to learn. And that curiosity that we have, we try to bring that out of our clients as they go through life, so that maybe they don't just stop and try to sit on the porch in a rocking chair and while away the time, but stay living and vibrant and pursuing what's next. So that's what I like to think that I do, is I help people always look for ways to become curious about how to be better.
Right. Sometimes the thought of sitting on the rocking chair on the porch, watching the world go by, there's temptation in that sometimes, but you're right. You can only do that for a short while and then you're kind of letting your life pass by, right? So what was it that brought you into this field?
And so I went to college to get an engineering degree. And I think that was the track I had sort of set for myself, because my dad was an engineer, because
Right.
I was good in math and science came easy. But somewhere along about sophomore year, with classes like differential equations and advanced calculus, I was like, I'm not sure that this theoretical stuff is for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I struggled with college initially. I struggled to choose which one to go to. I struggled to stay in the one I chose, but eventually I made a change. Went from the University of Buffalo to Rochester Institute of Technology, and it was actually playing lacrosse that drove the need to change.
All right.
I had passed up a partial scholarship to play at a Division I school that went on to win national championships. And while that was happening and my friends were having that kind of success, I was like, I want to do that. And the school I went to had a different kind of program, a club program. And so I changed schools. I got my engineering degree, worked for Pratt & Whitney, which is a jet engine manufacturer. Got laid off after Gulf War I back in early 1990s. And I was an assistant lacrosse coach asking liberal arts students, what are you going to do? There's a recession going on. And they were either going to Madison Avenue, Wall Street, law school, or teaching at a boarding school. Mm-hmm. And so I decided that I was going to go to a boarding school, teach math, and coach sports.
Okay.
I did that for 3 years. And in the last year of my teaching, I created a class on personal finance that involved higher levels of high school math. And weaving those two things together, the class was very popular, and kids would say, you should talk to our parents. Mm-hmm. So I thought, hey, that sounds like a more lucrative career. So I moved from Bethel, Maine, up in the mountains of Western Maine, down to Boston, and got into financial services. I've been doing this ever since.
Right. Okay. So that one moment of pivoting, I suppose, right, creating that class for your students created a whole new opportunity for you in what you do today.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always had an interest in money, and part of me was like, well, if you get an engineering degree and you get into an engineering management program, someday you'll be running the plant, be the plant manager, making a great salary. And, that was my model of what success would look like.
Right.
And it came from my dad.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes that's what happens is the family or the surroundings, right, that defines what you believe success will be, or what a good job looks like. That was one thing my mum often used to say was, you had a good job. And it's like, well, what do you mean by a good job? But it was this, and this, her metrics were different to maybe someone else's metrics of what a good job looks like. So as part of the work you do, you've created a model around how people should be thinking about their life and their relationship with money. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So when I created the Classic Gold Academy, I created it because I knew that some of the students were not going to go to college. Some of the students might, be hourly wage earners. And so becoming a financial advisor, learning the trade, taking the classes to study for the exams, and then coaching other advisors to go and have the same conversations with adults, we started to see some patterns. Mm-hmm. And back in 1998, there was a book out, put out by the Gallup organization called StrengthsFinder. First discover your strengths, then break all the rules. It was a book about management, and I read it, and one of the things that it said I was really good at was pattern recognition. So I was encouraged to look for patterns. The other thing it said about me is you're a maximizer, better at taking things that do exist and figuring out how to maximize or optimize them. So those ideas, along with an engineering training and a mathematical mind, I started looking at coaching young advisors to go out and speak to older folks, to tune into why you're there. Are you there because they have an issue with money, time management, energy management, which translates into interest? Like they're not really that interested in that. Or is it relationship management? Like, are there two people on the same page, or are they trying to get on the same page? And that became a lecture that I did a number of times about how we trade these four basic currencies to try and get what we want, which is a relationship with life. So time and energy and money and relationships became the foundation of recognizing this pattern. We want those things either more, easier to manage, or to protect what we got. So that was like the next piece, was protect, manage, pursue. And since what we're looking for are relationships with life, and relationships with money is one relationship with life, we we're like, I wonder how many relationships with money there are. So I graphed them. So there's not enough over time, enough all the time, more than enough. So we ended up with 7 relationships with money, and then we started to give them names. And so this whole thing just kind of unfolded by teaching other advisors. And then a number of these ideas started to produce almost like dreams. Like I'd wake up at 3:30 in the morning,
Right.
seeing like this entire system of how things are. And so it's 3 motivations, 4 currencies, 7 natures that move us through states, and we move up levels and live through stages of life. And so the book is something that was being written in me. And then during COVID, I'm like, I got to get this out of me. You know, it's weighing me down. It's occupying my mind. I need to try and figure out how to get out of this sort of mental and physical condition that I was in. And I thought, well, if I get it out on paper, get it out of my head, that will solve all my problems. So I thought, but it continues to not leave me alone.
So you wrote the book?
Yeah. I wrote the book. The book is Money Isn't Everything. Everything is Money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a personalized approach to valuing and trading time, energy, relationships, and money. And the basic premise is that each one of us is wired from the beginning to prefer a relationship with money. So there's 21 different types. And the way we trade our money is also indicative of the pattern we use to trade our time and our energy and even our words. And that's actually how we find our way into these discussions with people, is we do a quick assessment based on the language they use to talk to themselves. Mm-hmm. So 7 questions helps us understand the vocabulary that people use, and then we zero in on that. And it's kind of an awareness that helps them and helps us, especially when there's a couple.
Right.
Accept each other, because all these types are legitimate ways of being. So it's a pretty cool framework, and I'm just glad it's not all up here anymore, that it's actually on paper.
Yeah, I actually completed the questionnaire after we spoke, and they're very simple yet very powerful questions that you have there. There's 7 questions, and when you then receive that from a potential client or future client, yeah, what's the first thing you're looking for? There's the language patterns, but what else are you looking for within that?
Yeah, so there's 7 questions. You get to answer 7 questions, but kind of like the books that I was reading to my kids growing up, how you answer the question changes which question you get next. So there's actually 126 questions in there. And so when clients answer the questions, the next thing I want to know is, based on the results you got, how did it feel? Mm-hmm. Because there are 3 motivations for taking the assessment: to protect my identity, to discover my identity, or to try and manage my identity. And for people who try to manage it, they don't necessarily answer each question with their instinctive response. They apply a little bit of management to it. So I wonder what they're looking for here.
Yeah.
So every assessment, whether it's Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, all assessments run into this type of person who is we call the manager. And so it's really helpful for us to know if we have a investor manager, because taker, spender, earner, saver, investor, lever, giver, those are the 7 natures.
Okay.
And we need to know whether we've got a pursuer manager, a pursuer investor, a protector investor, or a manager investor, because those are very different ways of being wired.
So this is a very, I've never come across this sort of approach. I have come across financial advisors who coach you for financial performance, if you like, but don't really get deep into, if you like, your personality traits. I'm just trying to kind of paraphrase here. It's deeper, much deeper than that, but at a surface level, because you mentioned Myers-Briggs, that's probably why it's come to mind. So what's the kind of advice you then give to people having gone through this process of understanding what they look like or what their motivations are, as compared to another financial advisor who might say, well, okay, here's your portfolio today. Tell me what you want to achieve out of it, and we'll put a plan in place. And that's pretty much all they do.
But when I started out, we had amiables, expressives, drivers, and analytics. Like that was the personality type. So you were trained to use certain words. Like Tony Robbins is famous for teaching people to use neuro-linguistic programming to try and understand how to communicate to a certain type of person. That's a tool you can use on somebody. We didn't want to use a tool on somebody. We wanted to be involved in a process of understanding each other, a mutual curiosity to discover why am I here and what do you need from me? Mm-hmm. And sometimes what you need from me is a mirror of who you are, where you are, so we can turn from that understanding of self and look out at the person that you want to become. And if you turn around and then you try to see where I am, you're going to have to look over your shoulder into your blind spots. Yeah. I can see your blind spots. So if I know what your nature is, and I know your motivation, I know what type of person you are, it helps me understand what relationship with money is probably dominating your unconscious. Mm-hmm. And what might be your shadow self or your aspirational self. And we can get to that place very quickly. It doesn't take hours and hours and hours of therapy to understand a person after you've had them do this short little self-assessment, this sort of self-discovery of who am I? Mm-hmm. The managers resist. I had one woman, she took the assessment 7 times. She got giver every time. Mm-hmm. And I asked her, I said, why don't you want to be a giver? You seem to have a problem with the result you keep getting. And she said, well, I don't have any money to give. I said, well, this isn't just about money. It's about the things we value and how we trade them one for another so that we can build the kind of relationship we have with life. So if you don't have any money, is it because you give away your time and your energy? And like, are you that giving of these other aspects? And she said, oh, yeah, probably. So it helped her understand, but because she was trying to manage the assessment, she took it multiple times and answered questions differently to try and see if she would get a different result. Mm-hmm. And she did. She kept getting the same result over and over again.
Right. Okay. And maybe that's because I'm assuming she came to you because you're a financial advisor. So she's coming with that kind of mindset of money to start with. And then, as she said to you, I haven't got money to give, so therefore, how can I be a giver? Is that maybe why that was her perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, when we really start further into the work, the initial assessment is kind of a fun way to say, all 7 relationships are important. You have to spend money. You got to earn it. You got to say, like, all of them are important.
Mm-hmm.
You prefer one. And if we can agree on that idea that you prefer one, but all are important, we can start to see if there's some kind of a resistance or a bias. I had a woman who took the assessment. She got taker. She didn't like the word. And I said, "What do you do for work?" She said, "I'm a photographer." I'm like, you not liking the word would be like Michael Jordan rising up to shoot the game winner and saying, "I don't like taking the final shot." You know, it's not intended to box you in. It's just a observation of the self, that if you can let go of negative energies about different words, you can get pretty accurate about how people have been navigating life up to this point, trading this and that for something else so that they can get life to be the way they want. And you can see the floors and the ceilings that have been put in place because of their own way of talking to themselves.
So you help people to unlock all of that, as well as the kind of financial aspects of their life, right? So that they come out of an engagement with you in a more fulfilled way, already with a path to have a more fulfilled life.
I'll give you an example of how financial literacy does not create better outcomes.
Right.
There's plenty of research that says that awareness of all that you are choosing from is more important than trying to memorize a recipe of how to be successful. And that's especially true when you think about people being wired differently. What worked for you might not work for me.
Yeah.
And so if I give a recommendation to somebody and I don't realize that they're resisting it, they won't implement it. And if they don't implement that one, they might not implement the next one and the next one and the next one. And so this first initial place of resistance is something that's really important to explore, because there's a learning opportunity in everything we resist. You know, when we go to the gym and the weights push back, you know, we're getting stronger. And so this is just a way of creating a language that allows us to access the deeper portions of who you are that are in many respects making unconscious judgments and decisions about how life is supposed to be. Dave Ramsey's a famous radio podcaster personality who's built an empire on the idea that debt is evil. And so we've worked with people who have come out of Dave's programming. Financial literacy is what he's trying to teach. He's trying to teach it from a certain perspective. He's trying to teach it from a perspective that worked for him. But I was working with one gentleman who had bought so into the Dave Ramsey idea that he and his wife were going to get a divorce. And when asked why, she said, "Because I didn't marry Dave Ramsey. I married you."
Nice.
So what I would like is to know what you think. And, you know, so sometimes this language of money can be something we get really wrapped up in. And so pulling that apart, running the comb through the tangled hair, you know, the mind sort of has a tendency at 3:30 in the morning, you wake up and it's going around and around and around in a circle. And if we can understand what that circle is and cut into it, then we can route that off in a different direction and stop the spiraling out of control and turn it into a vortex that lifts you to a higher plane, takes you to a new level, moves you through a state of being that you're stuck on. So the floors and the ceilings can dissolve, and we can climb to a place that is better for us and better for the people around us as well.
This it strikes me that what you're doing is very, very deep kind of work with people and individuals. How did you? I know you said the model was there; it kind of came to you in dreams almost. But what was it that actually initially made you spark that thing that said, "Okay, here's something. This actually the way we need to be looking with our clients on their relationships, as opposed to some other sort of more typical, financial advisor or someone in a kind of similar role to you."
When I was a training manager, and I was teaching driver, analytic, amiable, expressive, when I was taking Myers-Briggs as part of some management, grooming of my own, and I was trying to understand who I was and how and why did I make decisions. And at the same time, I had two kids that were born, a year and a half or so apart, and they were both girls. And they were different right out of the gate. They were different, and their energies were different. Their mannerisms were different. Their bodies were different. Their hair was different. They were both blonde. People often would mistake them for twins because Kira, the younger one, was a little bigger. And one had straight blonde hair, one had curly blonde hair. They were different. And by working with young, aspiring financial advisors and raising two little girls, I really started to see that some of what we're wrestling with later in life is innate. It's been there from the very beginning. And so that's where we started thinking about, is this 4 currencies, 3 motivations, is there anything about it that could be genetic?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what the caduceus is?
No.
It's often mistaken as a medical symbol. You've got a center staff, 2 snakes wrapping around it that create these 7 vortexes.
Right.
That is not a medical symbol. The army uses it as the symbol for the medical corps. But it's not really a medical symbol. It's the symbol for Hermes or Mercury, who's the god of trade.
Right.
And so looking at that, and then looking at DNA, the double helix, and thinking about how genetic this is, having 2 kids, both girls, same gender, 23 chromosomes, 2 for gender, 21 for type. It just all started to come together. This notion that we are hardwired from the beginning based on our type of person. Then I ran across a study at Yale University done on monkeys. Capuchin monkeys were taught what money is. They were given wooden tokens and learned that they could trade them for food.
Okay.
And as they continued to teach them, they eventually ran a quantitative experiment. They set it up like a trading floor. 9:30, the door goes up, the monkeys come in, and there's 2 trading desks. One gives you a predictable experience, one gives you a very varied experience. So it's like the bond desk and the equity desk.
Right.
And they started looking at the patterns, both qualitative and quantitative, and they realized that monkeys steal, they hoard, they sometimes like to take a lot of risks. Some of them don't like to take any risk at all. And when they backed out the data, they realized that Capuchin monkeys appear in the population in the same ratios as human beings. Those behaviors are innate, but they're not just innate to our human population. It's a pattern that shows up in animals, but it's also a pattern that shows up in physics. It shows up in music. How many musical notes are there? 7. Colors in the rainbow, 7. How many valence shells spinning around the nucleus of a particle? 7. So because I have other people who work with me, but eventually we were using this concept of a very natural self to get to know clients, not as a sum total of all their experiences, because those experiences are gone. They're now in the past. Maybe they left trauma, and we don't necessarily want to play around with that. And so we want to get to know them, but by knowing how they're wired, we can know them independent of all of those experiences, which just create a lot of extra noise.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so if we can get underneath and understand, then we can put it on the table and we can have a language to talk about it if you're willing to accept this framework we have, that all of these relationships are important. So let's figure out which one is the most important for you, and then we can work our way going the right direction. And we will eventually come back around, because it's like a spiral. We will come back around, and if spending was a problem, but you're an earner, let's earn your way out of the problem, and then we'll come back and we'll look at your budget.
Right. Okay. So nature versus nurture, it's much more nature than nurture in this case.
Genetics and epigenetics is a really good model for how this all works. You are predisposed, but it's not a curse if you know it.
Yeah.
Truth shall set you free.
Absolutely. So, as you know, this podcast is called Success Matters.
Yep.
What does success mean to you?
I don't think I have to give this a lot of thought anymore, because I really do feel like I was put on this planet for a purpose, and success feels like the pursuit of that purpose.
Okay.
There was a moment when I was seeing a acupuncturist. I had a panic attack in 2008. It was actually 9/11, 2008 was when I had a panic attack. I took an ambulance to the hospital, and I didn't know until I got there what it was. And so in the recovery from that, I was seeing an acupuncturist. She walked into the waiting room one day, and I was reading a book on nutrition. And she said, "Have you figured it out?" And I said, "Figured what out?" She's like, "What you can eat." And I was like, "No, that's why I come to see you, is for answers to these kind of questions." She said, "You can eat anything. You're an omnivore." She's like, but I have an exercise I want to do with you." I said, "Okay." She said, "I want you to tell me your 3 core values." I said, "Really? Can't we just go put pins in me?" Like, I would much prefer that to this. She said, "Just humor me." So I thought for a second. I said, "Truth, loyalty, and best effort." And she looked me right in the eye. She said, "Is there any truth your loyalties are getting in the way of your best effort?"
Right.
I was like, holy cow. Yeah. And I knew immediately that I had some priority issues. I was letting certain relationships exist at a higher level of respect to other relationships.
Right.
And when I got those in the right order, and when I got what I was supposed to be doing in the right order, then I knew I had achieved a level of success that was then going to manifest at higher and higher levels, as long as I stayed connected to it. And by that point, I'd created most of this framework and architecture, but I was still trying to ferret out some of the wording.
Right.
The first question in the assessment is, where do you go to save? You go to a bank, or do you go to a discount store? Yeah. And so still it was probably, that was 2009. So it's probably 2016 before we actually settled in on the meaning of all of the different words that make up our framework.
Yeah, words have so much, they carry so much meaning that I can understand why it took you from 2009 to 2016 to get that model in the shape that you wanted it to get. So thank you for sharing that with me. I have a tradition in my podcast to ask a previous guest for a question for my next guest.
Yeah.
So my previous guest asked the question, what's the most interesting place you've traveled to, and what impact did it have on your life?
I would say it was probably going to Costa Rica for the first time. I was going there to attend the Gross Global Happiness Summit.
Okay.
It was coming out of COVID. It was the first time that I'd gone to something like that, a gathering of people in public, out of the country. So it already had a lot of elements to make it different
Yeah.
or special. But it was also my first time out of the United States, really. I'd been to the U.S. Virgin Islands, but you don't need a passport to get there.
Yeah.
And I'd been to France to go skiing, but this was like the first time I'd really gone to a foreign country and seen what a foreign country city would look and feel like. And it was also the first time I'd ever really tried surfing.
Okay.
So it was a very, very unique experience. I went and did the surfing first, and then I drove from the West Coast up to San Jose. The driver spoke Spanish. I didn't speak much Spanish. We stopped for lunch at a place where dogs were allowed to lay at the table at your feet next to you. It's just a very, some of the roads we drove on the beach for a little while. Some of the roads seemed like, they wouldn't be all that good if it was raining.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really an opportunity to see that the rest of the world is not the way it is in all the places I've lived.
Right. Yeah. It can be very humbling going to a country that's developing, right? And Costa Rica has done a lot with regards to its environment and its environmental aspects. But certainly, yes, going to places that are developing countries, it's you realize what you have, and how simple things can be for us compared to life for them. And yet they seem to live a happier life in some ways with the simplicity that they have.
I also went to this conference in a foreign country about happiness. And I would say there were 2 6-foot-tall white light-haired men at the conference.
Okay. You being one of them.
I was one of them. And the other one was from Germany.
Right.
And everybody else, a lot of women, a lot of people from Latin America, other countries from around the world. And so I was having a conversation with Luis, who's one of the founders of this movement. And he's like, we need more guys like you. I said, you mean middle-aged white guys? He's like, no. People who know money.
Right.
I'm like, oh, all right. Because one of the chapters in my book, I talk about how these natures equate to ways of pursuing happiness. That if I am a taker, that excitement is probably the way I define happiness. If I'm a saver, maybe it's relaxation. If I'm a giver, it could be passion.
Right.
And so to know how I pursue happiness is an extremely powerful thing once you accept that happiness pursued the same way is like chewing gum. It loses its flavor on the bedpost overnight. So if you can learn other ways, then you're not just your nature, you're a second nature, a third nature, a fourth nature, a whole being.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Do you have a question for my next guest?
Yeah, I love this question because I always ask it in my currency camp program. Thinking back on your experiences earlier in life, what was like your first independent money experience?
Okay. What was your first independent money experience?
Yep.
What was yours?
So I had earned some money. I got on my bike and I rode down to what we called the Fayetteville Free Pharmacy. And I bought football cards with the bubble gum inside.
Right.
And I bought candy bars and I OD'd on sugar and drove my bike home.
Yeah, I think mine was something similar, actually. Probably, getting some money and then deciding I'm going to buy a whole load of sweets with it is probably one of mine as well. Something else that crossed my mind was when I bought my first pair of shoes, actually, which were funded by myself and not by someone else, which is kind of like, it's just stuck in my mind.
I still have the football collection, the football card collection. Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea if it's worth anything.
Yeah.
And I haven't looked at them in a lot of years, but yeah, I probably have 2 shoe boxes full of football cards.
Wow.
And that's why I have, fillings, silver fillings in all my molars.
Yes. Yeah, me too. Well, Tom, we're at the top of our time. That's been a very fascinating conversation and a very deep conversation as well. I'm fascinated to learn more about the models and the theory you have, and I'm sure my listeners are as well. What's the best way for them to find out more and to get in touch with you?
The best place to go is currencycamp.com. Currency, not money, because we trade time and energy and words as well as money to get the things that we want out of life. And at currencycamp.com, you can find the book, you can take the assessment, and there's even some introductory courses that you can take that are kind of helpful for creating more awareness around your relationships with money.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for taking part in Success Matters. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure, Sanjay.
To find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.